Welcome to the Mile High Hoops Podcast with me, Jake Shapiro, and my guy, Aniello Piro. And we are talking to you right before the Denver Nuggets meet up with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they need to beat these guys, Aniello. The Timberwolves have had the Nuggets number going back to Game 6 of the playoffs last year when the Nuggets suffered one of their worst road playoff losses, worst losses ever, really, getting killed in that Game 6. And then, of course, they blow that Game 7, the worst Game 7 lead blown in the history of the NBA. The Timberwolves have proceeded to beat the Nuggets 3 times this season, and they've got one more matchup, and it's on Tuesday night. And this will say a lot because these two teams right now, looking on Basketball Reference, are most probable to match up with each other in the first round.
And I understand that there's seeding in play in regards to the remaining games this season for the Denver Nuggets, but I think from an emotional perspective, this has got to be the most important game remaining on the schedule for the Denver Nuggets. Now, we'll break it down here on the show. Maybe not a full-strength Minnesota Timberwolves team after some punches and elbows being thrown over the weekend, but nonetheless, from Denver's perspective, it's a game they have to have emotionally, physically, and build some momentum going into the playoffs. You mentioned it. 3 wins in a row for Minnesota this season. If they win this one, they'll sweep the season series, but 5 wins in a row dating back to the playoffs last year. Denver's got to figure out a way to get the job done here on Tuesday.
Yeah, and you look at the first one that happened this season, Aniello, and they blew an 11-point lead on the road.
I was watching.
Yep, me too. Second one, they get killed on the road. And then the third one, which happened earlier this month, they get killed at home. And the Nuggets have suffered some of their worst home losses this season, but to me, that was among the most telling and most troubling because it seems like the Nuggets just see that blue and green jersey of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and there's something mentally off with the Nuggets. It's not even like there's anything that the Timberwolves do in particular that is that different or radical from other teams. More so, they've got a combination of all the things that kind of work best against the Nuggets. And the Nuggets, I feel like in the second half of that game, just kind of threw in the towel and said, we don't have it against these guys.
Yeah, I think the one common denominator with Minnesota is how aggressive they play, and in particular how aggressive they are in defending Jamal Murray, whether it's Anthony Edwards, and then obviously Michael Porter Jr. just needing to get going and the inability for him to get going in these matchups. And head coach Michael Malone talked about it on Monday at Nuggets practice, kind of talking about how he said, quote, I think they've approached this game like it's a rivalry in regards to Minnesota, and I think we've approached these games like it's just another game sometimes, end quote. He continues, we just got to play harder, whether it's a rivalry or not. I don't care who you're playing. If you're playing St. Buzzies and they beat you 5 times in a row, something with your pride has got to kick in. So Michael Malone doesn't mince words there. A lot of coach speak, but I think, Murray had a quote in this weird losing streak that we saw from the Nuggets about a week and a half ago where they were kind of one on, one off, talking about how it's up to the players to kind of carry the water of the coach's message. So Malone's saying it. It's just a matter of will the players respond to it?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at with this team, Aniello, and we've kind of questioned whether or not Malone's kind of lost his message with the team at times. And I'm not sure that this game is a great litmus test for Malone's message because I just look at the matchups and there's so many matchup problems with this game. Starting with, to me, the main one, which is Christian Braun versus Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards this season is going to lead the NBA in threes taken, which is crazy for a guy that's known for dunking. It's basically what would happen if, what was his name? Richardson on the Warriors, who went to Michigan State. He's got the son going to Michigan State right now. Jason Richardson. It's like if Jason Richardson was actually good, or J.R. Smith. If J.R. Smith actually turned his talents out. Like, that's kind of what we're seeing with Anthony Edwards, and obviously it's more like Dwayne Wade at this point. But Christian Braun, in some ways, I thought, when the Nuggets had their offseason, was better built to guard Anthony Edwards than Kentavious Caldwell-Pope because Christian Braun is stouter, he's got a bigger frame, he might be able to meet Anthony Edwards at the basket. But because Anthony Edwards has turned into an even more perimeter player this year, I think it kind of accentuates the missing of KCP. So I went ahead and looked at these numbers. And this season, Christian Braun against Anthony Edwards in their 3 contests has allowed 10.3 points per game and is allowing Anthony Edwards to shoot 54.5%, which is pretty good. Because last year, KCP in the same time frame, regular season, 4 games played, allowed Anthony Edwards to actually score more points per game, 11.3, and shoot 60%. The difference is last year Edwards shot 44% from 3 on KCP. This year he's shooting 50% from 3 on Christian Brown. So those 3-point shooting numbers, and then if you want to take it further, what KCP did in the 7 games against Ant in the playoffs, 8 points a game, a little bit lower, obviously, 50% from the field, 43% from 3. So I give you all these stats to say Christian Brown's actually doing a pretty good job on Anthony Edwards. The problem is Anthony Edwards is taking more threes, and where Christian Brown struggles is screen navigation, and that's what Anthony Edwards is doing more of this year.
100%. And look, good offense is going to be good defense 9 times out of 10 in the NBA, but you bring up a fantastic point in regards to the overall volume of shots that Anthony Edwards is taking from 3. And maybe this is something that the stats can't necessarily track, but when I think of KCP playing perimeter defense on the 3-point line, I picture him almost like the hip thrust. He was able to dig into a bag of tricks as a veteran where, okay, I know how to defend this guy. I know how to get leverage on this guy doing this and whatnot. And Christian, for lack of a better phrase, looks a little try-hardish out there. Kind of I don't want to say overthinking, but just so focused on making the right play where I think KCP, based off his experience and all his playing time in the NBA, was able to kind of flow into this a little bit more naturally. Now, I think you obviously talk about the difference in experience level, whatever it might be. I think Christian Brown has done a great job, but Anthony Edwards, will be an MVP one day, will likely win an NBA Finals one day, and is not just one of the best young players in the NBA, one of the best players in the NBA, period.
He's scoring 27 a game this year.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can only do so much against Anthony Edwards, but it's definitely a matchup that is critical to the success of Denver in this one.
Yeah, and again, I think Christian, particularly in games against Anthony Edwards and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, has done a good job of focusing his game more on the defensive end. It's those two-way capabilities that KCP offered the Nuggets that he's not really offering the Magic right now, that the Nuggets are missing. And there is some thought to this, Aniello, of putting Peyton Watson on Anthony Edwards, and there's some belief for me that I think it could work out better because of Anthony Edwards' uses his size. Peyton Watson's got a little bit more size on him. The problem is I think as soon as a screen comes and hits Peyton Watson, he's done for. And to me, Peyton's really good at defending the rim, which, again, is good for Anthony Edwards, but he's really good from the help side. I'd almost rather have Peyton Watson playing off-ball in that series, or you start both Peyton Watson and Aaron Gordon, and you have Aaron Gordon guarding Rudy Gobert, and you have Peyton Watson guarding Anthony Edwards, and those two just switch everything. And to me, that might be the Nuggets' kind of trump card, their secret card in the deck to stopping Anthony Edwards. But the thing is, Michael Malone hasn't really been willing to play Peyton Watson in the playoffs. To this point, I think the last run of games here has shown that Peyton Watson needs to play in the playoffs.
Well, I think we talked about it on last week's show, that if it is Denver, Minnesota in the playoffs, I mean, it's imperative that he plays. If Denver is going to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in a playoff series, Peyton Watson will be a large reason why. You expect Jamal, despite the difficulties, to figure out a way to get going. You also need Michael Porter Jr., but Peyton, a guy who got the start in Friday's game against Utah, no Jamal Murray in that one, made the most of his opportunities, 8, 5, and 4. And you talked about whether they're going to switch, whatever it might be. You need that athleticism that Peyton Watson brings to the table that Denver's roster is lacking for the most part otherwise there. So definitely something to keep an eye on, and whether it's switching, whether it's having him stick down low, whatever it might be, Malone has to kind of go against the grain here a little bit. He loves to keep these tight rotations. I heard his post-game press conference on Utah about when we're healthy, it's hard to play everybody. Well, one guy that needs minutes, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, is Peyton Watson.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we're going to watch the Denver Nuggets play the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Nuggets right now are 47-28. The Timberwolves are 43-32. The Timberwolves are currently in the 7th seed. The Nuggets are currently in the 3rd seed.
Yikes.
But looking at it and how these teams' rest of the season could go, it very well could end up being a 3-6 or a 2-7 for these teams. I think if you're a Nuggets fan, what you should really be rooting for is the Timberwolves to lose as many games as possible, be the 8th seed, have a one-game play-in on the road, and the best thing they could do in that second play-in is play the Thunder. And,
love that.
Maybe as a Nuggets fan, you're even rooting for Memphis to fall to 6, who obviously just fired their coach and is kind of a train wreck at this point.
Makes no sense. I still don't understand that.
Really?
I know it's a Nuggets show, but you tell me, is there a reason? Is there a method to the madness?
They haven't beaten a good team in 2 months.
Yeah, but Ja's played in half their games.
Ja's played in half their games for several seasons.
Why fire him at game 72 or 73? Why not just ride it out and make the switch, on Black Monday?
You saw what they did at the trade deadline, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. They obviously don't have faith in this roster. They changed their entire assistant coaching staff last season. They obviously didn't have faith in the coaching staff. They figure, in my estimation, that this playoff was going to go poorly. They were going to go down in 4 to 6 games in the first round. So why not just push the emergency exit button and try something radical before the playoffs if you already knew you were going to fire Jenkins anyway?
It's fair. It's just something that I haven't really seen done before in the NBA. Usually there's an off-the-court issue associated with something like this. Not speculating, but to just do it why not do that at the trade deadline? Why even start the season with Taylor Jenkins? I know it's not a Memphis podcast here, but it's just interesting. But to your point.
Well, it has a big effect on the Nuggets because to me, I thought the big team that was going to affect the Nuggets in their window was the Memphis Grizzlies.
Really?
And they've been the 2 seed the entire time that the Nuggets have been good. It just hasn't worked out for them, right? But I really like this new Grizzlies head coach. I don't know if you know anything about him.
I can't say I do. Enlighten me.
So Tomas Aiello, I think his name is, or Lisiello, he's Finnish, okay? So he goes to, he's coaching around Europe, and he takes over Paris Basket last year, which at the time when he took it over was second level in the French league, and now it's risen to be the top team in Paris, in France. And he runs this radical, high-speed, kind of high-paced Paul West-heady offense where he's throwing more guys in. They don't run ball screens. And he brings this offense in, and they immediately vault up to Tier 1. They win the French League, and they won, I think they didn't win EuroLeague, but they made it to EuroLeague, and they went far in EuroLeague. So he gets hired as the Grizzlies' assistant to remake their offense, right? And their offense this year, the Grizzlies have been good. And they've been playing 11 players all season long, which is uncommon for NBA teams. They normally play 10, 9, 8. The reason why Ja Morant has struggled this season is because they're not running ball screens, which is the offense that they're running. So the debate and questions that they've had this season that has potentially led to Taylor Jenkins being fired, which is what offense we should be running, and the things that Ja has been upset about, they've just promoted the assistant coach that's running the new offense that Ja's upset about.
Interesting.
So is there something in their organization that is going, we're getting out of the Ja Morant business? That to me was the bigger hint from that move, or
Fair.
perhaps it was the we need to do something radical to keep Ja here. And I think that's a situation worth watching because not only is Ja Morant one of the biggest stars in the league and it affects the Nuggets, but Kevin Durant is a rumored potential possibility for that team. So to me, what happens in Memphis this offseason and this playoff stretch is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, they're one of the more interesting teams in the NBA for sure. Obviously, Ja, that whole situation, now the head coach and everything. We'll have to see how it shakes out, but I'm not afraid of Memphis personally.
No, you want them.
Yeah, there's 2 teams. We've talked about it. It's Oklahoma City and it's Minnesota and maybe the Lakers are the 3 teams you want to try to avoid as much as possible in the playoffs if you're Denver.
You know, and I know they've beaten them 9 times in a row, but there is something to the Warriors' second best player being Jimmy Butler.
True.
Like, that is a little scary, and oftentimes these playoff matchups do come down to the second best player. I think the Clippers, the way Kawhi Leonard has looked, is a little scarier than people realize. But ultimately, if you're a Denver Nuggets fan, you're going to have to play somebody in the playoffs. The good teams are coming. I think all you can hope to is avoid them for as long as possible. And to me, the best situation possible is the Thunder end up with the 1, the Timberwolves end up with the 8, and they knock each other out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And, you got to play who's on your schedule. Like we talked about it, I think, last week and when we hosted Denver Sports Tonight is, has Denver kind of learned from their mistakes? Last year they, faced that tough Minnesota Timberwolves team in the second round, ran out of gas. Does Denver prioritize health over seeding? I think they are, just based off what we've heard a little bit from Michael Malone.
Yeah.
And so we'll see how that picks back up for them. But one thing I want to talk to you about real quick, 3 days of rest for the Denver Nuggets going into this matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves. There's only been one such scenario for the Denver Nuggets having 3 full days of rest this season, and it did not fare so well. It was early in the year. They lost to the Los Angeles Clippers on the first day of December, 126-122. You concerned at all with this 3 days of rest thing? The other thing here is they're not so good with 2 days of rest, 3-5 this season, with wins against Sacramento twice, New Orleans once, and losses to notable teams like Minnesota, Dallas with Luka, Portland, Boston, and Milwaukee.
Back-to-back merchants.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Which is so strange.
Yeah. Historically, and I don't know if you could find the stat last year as well, but I think the whole Jokic era, if I can remember correctly, they've been terrible on multiple nights of rest. I don't know what that is. I'm not too concerned with it because they practiced today and they had the weekend off, so it should feel a little bit more regular, and they've been at home the whole time rather than traveling and maybe ending or starting a road trip, which I think can end up in some bad situations in the NBA. One thing I did want to bring up, though, is with this matchup, and the potential suspensions of Naz Reid and Dante DiVincenzo, do you think it impacts the way you're going to view it if the Nuggets win, if those guys are not out there? Or to you, is it just purely a mental thing? They need to beat literally whoever 5 guys show up in a Minnesota Timberwolves jersey.
I think it's obviously a combination of the two. Like, your latter point, like, you have to beat the Timberwolves. Like, you have to get some confidence. You have to feel good about your chances going up against this team should you run into them come playoff time. But one guy that you mentioned, I know Dante DiVincenzo's a newcomer. He's been there for the 3 wins this year, but was not there in the playoffs last year. Not the case for Naz Reid, who is someone that has been a thorn in the Nuggets side. We've talked about Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, but not having Naz Reid, I think, definitely changes the overall complexion of this Minnesota Timberwolves team. So while, yes, priority number 1 is go out there, beat Minnesota, take care of your home court, and build some momentum going into the playoffs, I do think there is a little bit of an asterisk just because they're not at full strength, and the player that might be missing due to suspension is Naz Reid, who's so critical.
Yeah, Naz wasn't even that good last year in the playoffs for the Timberwolves, but he offers so much size, and especially without Cat. I think primarily they'd probably defend Jokic with Naz Reid in a playoff series and have Rudy on the help side. Especially with the way teams are guarding the Nuggets and people aren't paying attention to Russ, Christian, and sometimes even Aaron. I look at this, though, and I think, is this game similar to last year's Wolves game at the end of the regular season, where Jokic absolutely goes ham on Rudy Gobert, Peyton Watson has like 6 blocks in this game, and you're feeling like the top of the world. You're feeling like if you meet the Wolves in the playoffs, you're going to kick their behind, and this secured you the 1 seed before they lost it the next night in San Antonio. Like, you felt, that's the best I felt about the Nuggets last year, was after that Wolves game, second to after game 5 against the Wolves. So in my mind, this game could almost be a mirage of, okay, you beat the Wolves, but without 2 of their 8 best rotation players, and it's without some of the things they do the best with Dante DiVincenzo 3-point shooting and Naz Reid's size guarding Jokic on the backside.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, Minnesota, to your point, obviously we know who the GM is, and we'll talk about that dynamic here in a moment as well, but they know how to beat this Denver Nuggets team. And another guy that I think you need to keep an eye on that absolutely crushed the Nuggets the last time they played back in the middle of March, Julius Randle.
Yeah.
Put 25 points in that matchup, was able to get his shot. You talk about Naz Reid and his impact on defense, but Julius Randle, minus Anthony Edwards, has been able to pick and choose some spots.
Well, the Nuggets didn't have Aaron Gordon in that game, right?
Correct.
And that's the perfect guy to guard Julius Randle.
Correct, 100%.
So that changes that a little bit.
But the other thing you talk about, and I forget exactly how you worded it, is, you know, kind of disregarding Christian Brown and Russell Westbrook at times to try to focus on Jokic.
Knock yourself out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's where, look, we know what Russ is at this point in his career. Any positive offense you get from him is absolute cream. But Christian's got to be a guy, along with Peyton Watson, who we talked about earlier in the show. Can you knock down your corner 3? Can you force the Minnesota Timberwolves, or really any team for that matter, respect your 3-point shooting? Because if Denver's able to accomplish that, and you've got Christian Brown, 2, maybe 3 threes if you're lucky in the bank, Peyton Watson, 2 threes from the corner, you might have a chance to try to switch up this matchup dynamic against the Timberwolves.
I do want to get into Tim Conley and how much the Nuggets regret maybe letting him go. I want to do that on a whole show because I think there's so many intricacies to that conversation. I'm really looking forward to this basketball game. We're going to talk to you after the Nuggets play the Wolves and the Spurs again on Thursday. That should be an interesting pod because we will have learned something about the Nuggets. I'm not sure exactly what. He's Aniello Piro. I'm Jake Shapiro. Thanks for tuning into the Mile High Hoops podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to all of our content. And comment, too. We want to interact with you. Denver Sports on YouTube. Piro, Shapiro, signing out.